For decades, Texas law gave police discretion to withhold information if a suspect died in their custody. Legislative efforts to close that loophole failed for years, but it did not stop the families denied video and other records detailing their loved ones' final moments from speaking out. Following a KXAN investigation spanning multiple sessions at the state capitol, lawmakers voted to close that controversial legal gap known as the dead suspect loophole. Today, on a special edition of Inside the Investigation, we take a closer look from the vault at our team's project called Denied. Welcome to an edition of Inside the Investigation. I'm KXAN Investigative Director Josh Hinkle, and I'm joined today by our special guest, the Executive Director of the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas, Kelly Shannon. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Obviously today we're talking about the dead suspect loophole, but before we get to that very serious topic, I gotta say, I like a good fight. I have a little brother, he knows this, and so being a journalist and open records fight is kind of one of the fun things about that. It's satisfying, but you do it for a reason. Why are open records so important?
Okay, one thing I like to tell everyone is open records is not just an abstract thing. It really affects people's lives. It's even a matter of life and death sometimes when we're trying to get information. But it also affects everyday life, like, school district budgets, the taxes you pay. So there's all kinds of really good reasons to try to get that information from your government.
Yeah, and so the fight part of it is really satisfying as a journalist because you sometimes are trying for months, even years, to get this information that is so important to the public so you can report on that. And, it's not just journalists, it's lawyers, it's, people that are in their everyday lives just trying to secure records too. So very, very important. Today specifically, we're talking about what was formerly called the dead suspect loophole by many people. And this was a provision, if you've been watching along our Denied docuseries, just streamed on the KXAN Plus app. If you're watching on KXAN.com, you can go to the link that's below this video and you can check out that docuseries there. This is the KXAN investigation that was going on for years as we documented this loophole in the Texas Public Information Act. What did the dead suspect loophole intend to do originally when it was created, and what did it end up becoming?
Yeah, so it was created in the 1990s as part of the law. It wasn't intended as a loophole at all. It was really intended to protect the innocent, those who maybe were arrested and then the charges were dropped, or it was found that this did not need to go on to trial for whatever reason. If it did not go to a conviction or a deferred adjudication at trial, the idea was to keep a lot of the information, not the basic information, but a lot of the narrative and other information off limits to the public to protect the reputation of that innocent or non-convicted person. What started happening through the years is different law enforcement agencies found a little loophole and started using that. So when somebody died in police custody, they said, well, this has not gone to a trial, to a conviction or deferred adjudication. Well, guess what? The person died, so it's not going on to a trial. And that was how the loophole was really created by law enforcement agencies that were misusing it and not interpreting the intent of the law properly.
And this went on for decades until, groups like the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas got involved to really remedy some of those things and fix the bad intent or the unintended consequences of loopholes like that and many other laws. Tell me a little bit about the FOIFT. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so we are a nonprofit. We've been around since 1978, and we are all about open government and then the First Amendment rights of free speech and free press. And the idea is those things go hand in hand. You as a citizen cannot adequately question your government and speak out against or for or whatever with your government if you don't have the information you need. So those things go hand in hand. And what we're always trying to do is protect and strengthen our open government laws.
Yeah, and Kelly roped me in a couple of years ago to be on the FOIFT board. Just a little bit of information for you right there. So I'm happy to be part of those conversations. And from time to time, our KXAN Investigative team has gone and represented journalists and the FOIFT talking to legislative committees about some of these things, including the dead suspect loophole.
Yes, absolutely. And it's great that the legislators hear from journalists as well as everyday citizens just about why open government matters, why access to our information that's held by the government, why that matters.
So over the years, we've really worked to humanize the outcome and the impact of the dead suspect loophole. I think we first started covering it at KXAN back in maybe 2018. That was several legislative sessions ago, and the bills to close this suspect loophole had been coming up session after session and just failing until 2023. Prior to that, there was a very unfortunate circumstance that happened in Uvalde, as you know, the mass shooting that was there at the school, and that sparked a lot of concern about whether the dead suspect loophole would be used in that case, because so many people wanted to see exactly what happened so they could hold the right people accountable, right?
Yes, and to prevent something like that hopefully from happening again. If you learn from things, maybe you can take steps to prevent tragedies in the future. But the whole loophole issue had been building for years and years, and then once the terrible situation happened in Uvalde, that really brought it even further into focus for everyone here at the Capitol.
And when that really played out over the year after Uvalde into the legislative session, then that was the catalyst that really got a lot of lawmakers who maybe didn't realize the importance or the crucial aspects of this loophole and what it was doing. This really brought it home for some of them, because this was a tragedy you couldn't really ignore. So it went through the legislative process, and it ended up passing eventually.
Yeah, after many sessions, yes.
And it kind of got held up at the last minute. It was some weird drama there, like I've never seen really. The physical bill was actually lost in the process, so it never did get signed by the right people until some people started pointing it out and realizing, like, hey, this never went to the governor's desk, so is this a law that's going into effect or not? How did that play out?
Yeah, and there was a lot of drama even before that, because, you know, as you say, there's a lot of different interests, and many people negotiate on a bill or raise questions about it on both sides. So a lot of that drama played out in the final weeks of the legislative session. And then you get down to the bottom, it seems like it's all passed. The Senate's passed it, the House has passed it, and then there was this question of where is the bill? And it turns out the lieutenant governor had set it aside for a bit while some other matters were dealt with and looked at. And then finally it was pointed out, hey, that bill's never been signed and made it to the governor yet, so that the governor can decide what to do about it. And so finally, you know, that scrutiny, you know, I don't know if that's what led it to pop out and appear, but for whatever reason, the scrutiny was very important, because the public needs to know what's happening with this legislation that the public is supporting. So that's what occurred.
And so at the end of the process, it did finally get passed along to the governor to consider, you know, becoming law with his signature, or he has the option of letting something become law without his signature. And really that's kind of a matter of if he wants to show that he's supporting something, or if this is something that he's just maybe not willing to touch politically. How did that play out? I mean, he didn't end up signing the law.
No, it became law without his signature, but we're just very glad that it became the law. For whatever the reasoning was, you know, there's a couple different ways something can become law, and it did. And so it's super important. We're still monitoring it and watching to make sure that this part of the law is used as it was intended and that transparency prevails.
So over the years, one of the biggest opponents to closing the loophole has been the police unions in the state of Texas. That's a very powerful lobby here. They have the ear of a lot of lawmakers. A lot of different legislation, not even related to open records, goes through the Capitol, relating to law enforcement and law enforcement officers and their interests. So when we had seen this kind of get a little further in the process in the past, you would see some of that, you know, that power from that lobby really come out. I know in the session since the law went into effect and the loophole was technically closed, there have been some other law enforcement matters that it has kind of come back up into the conversation. Can you explain how that played out in this last session?
So absolutely. So of course the police union in Texas is a very strong lobby here at the Capitol, and you know, and police officers perform an amazing, important job. So you know, they should have quite a large voice. The key from our point of view is you can be very pro-police and pro-public safety, yet also be pro-transparency. So that's the thing that we're always trying to point out. It's not an either or. This year in the various legislative sessions, there was a bill that came up that would have created a secret police file for many departments and allowed certain information to go into that file if there was a complaint against an officer that was deemed to be unsubstantiated and didn't end up in disciplinary action. So one of our concerns was the way the wording was so vague, wasn't precise enough. There are many records that might have ended up in that secret file, including sometimes when someone dies in police custody. So therein is the issue of this loophole that we've been talking about, and there was a lot of concern that all that work, all those years, and the 2023 passage of that law might be undercut, undermined, or just negated by this other law that was proposed this year.
And that didn't go through. Obviously FOIFT and other groups monitor statewide to see if other media outlets or other legal challenges to this law and all the other laws that you all are watching are popping up. We pay attention to things that are happening at the Attorney General's office also to just make sure that there aren't any challenges or if there's anything to address. And sometimes you have to come back in the next session and continue tweaking legislation to get it maybe to the better place that it should be. One of the things about the legislative process is that sometimes it's difficult to grab attention of lawmakers when it's just like policy or advocacy groups like FOIFT or even journalists. And so it really helps to have real people that the laws that we're talking about every session are really impacting. I remember when we first started covering the dead suspect loophole, traveling up to Paris, Texas, far away from Austin,
right.
This little farmhouse that's outside of the town, and meeting with Robert and Kathy Dyer. And I was just so struck by, first off, if you've watched the docuseries, they unfortunately lost their 18-year-old son, Graham Dyer, in one of these police incidents as well. They were still dealing with a lot of the legal process with that, the lawsuits. It was a very raw and emotional thing to talk about, but they shared their story. And not only did they share their story with KXAN and other media outlets, but they came to the Capitol session after session to talk to lawmakers directly. Can you imagine what that's like to be, I think Kathy was a state employee at the time, and Robert was a teacher.
Yeah, middle school teacher.
Middle school
right.
teacher. To not really have any experience doing public speaking where you're having to go in front of what I think could be kind of a scary panel, a committee of lawmakers, people that have been elected to represent you, some powerful people, telling your very upsetting story in the hopes that something will change. And that's really the kind of testimony that resonates with people. And sometimes it doesn't take that first time, doesn't stick. And so you learn in the process, and that's really what the Dyers did, and other people as well that this law affected. They came back session after session and talked about it, and came to the Freedom of Information Foundation annual conference and continued telling their stories so people understood this very detailed part of the open record system was actually not even just about that. It was about people and life and death situations.
Yeah, it's such an emotional thing, and Kathy had mentioned that each time they had to come here and tell that story, it's like opening the wound once again. Not that it ever really goes away, but it's so gut-wrenching for them. But at the same time, they're trying to help improve the lives of Texans and improve our laws in Texas. So there's that monumental force that was driving them, and so they would explain their situation. And I remember even the very first time they testified at the Capitol, it was very emotionally upsetting to everybody in the room. There was Kleenex being passed out all over the place with staffers and legislators. It grabbed everybody, but there wasn't the right momentum or the right pieces in place at the Capitol at that time to get it passed. And so each session, it seemed to just hit a little bit deeper, and people got it, and they realized, these folks aren't giving up. They are going to be back here telling this story again and again. And not only the Dyers, but many other families we saw came to these hearings too once the word started getting out about this bill. And there were a lot of them that we weren't even expecting, and they drove in from all kinds of cities all over the state. And the problem started becoming more and more clear, and that helped set the stage for, once you had the right pieces in place at the legislature in the will to get it done, the atmosphere was created, and then the will to get it done was finally there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank, and I've thanked them many times before, but continue thanking the Dyers for sharing their story with our viewers and our readers and our listeners and other people as well. Like Kelly mentioned, I have to shout out to Demisha Burns. She's a mother from Bastrop who also lost her son in the Travis County Jail, a similar circumstance, spoke out about it. And of course, all the Uvalde families too.
Absolutely, yeah. And all of these situations, what we've got at the center of it is, people are losing loved ones in a violent situation, very different types of situations, but it's just an emotionally charged, extremely upsetting thing that's going to be with you your whole life. And yet they've got the courage to come here and to talk about it, and that's so impressive.
Well, Kelly, I really appreciate all the work that you and FOIFT continue doing on behalf of the people of the state of Texas, and for continuing to be the experts to talk to us about some of these very detailed things that are still really important. So thank you for also being here.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks
it.
for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. And you can watch the Inside the Investigation segments that we produce every Friday on our KXAN Plus app or on KXAN.com. And we also have an audio version with our KXAN Investigates podcast that is out with a new episode every Saturday. So please listen, watch, read our stuff, and thanks for tuning in.